Discover the incredible wedding gift that silenced an entire town after she married at just 19. The warm summer afternoon buzzed with whispers and laughter around Emma and Jake as they celebrated their recent vows. Yet beneath the surface of their shared joy, a sinister undercurrent shimmered in the whispers of the townsfolk. Could such young love withstand the unforgiving grip of reality? Located in the heart of a small, struggling town, doubts festered among the elite, anxious to see the couple stumble, to validate their own insecurities. As the couple opened gifts, Emma's attention was captured by a stunningly adorned box nestled amongst the usual kitchenware and towels. Curiosity pushed her to unearth its secret. Inside lay a treasure trove of letters and old photographs, sending her heart racing. Unfolding each letter, she felt her grip tighten with every word, recalling each ink-stained page that revealed a legacy she didn't recognize. It spoke of her grandmother, a woman once regarded as a trailblazer, standing resilient against the tide of inequality. Emma's brows furrowed as she absorbed the significance of her lineage. What did it mean to be an heir to such strength? The town's elite had always turned an indifferent eye towards the struggles faced by her family, and now the very revelations of her heritage ignited a fire within her, a desire to reclaim that legacy and challenge the structures that had kept her kin muted for so long. Sweat beaded at her brow with each thought, particularly as she considered the pushback from well-to-do families who thrived by keeping things as they were. Would they seek to silence her? Every push forward seemed to drag her further into a space of uncertainty between the life she cherished with Jake and the fight brewing within her. Staring at the letters laid out before her, her breath quickened. Could she risk everything, her love, her peace, only to uncover whispers of injustice? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Bracing herself for the inevitable town hall meeting ahead, Emma's resolve began to harden. The familiar faces she had grown up with held layers of unfamiliarity now, ones that shielded hurtful truths and reinforced an oppressive silence. As she stepped into the meeting, the tension was palpable. Eyes flickered with both recognition and disdain. Would they accept her testimony, her truth? What if they didn't? Would that shatter everything Jake believed in for their life together?
Her anxiety swirled like a tempest in her mind as she gripped the microphone, the weight of her family's secrets settling in her stomach like a stone. With a trembling voice, she prepared to unveil the strength of her grandmother, a narrative waiting to stain the town's historic fabric. But the moment she began, a familiar face interjected, injecting doubt into her words, and the ground beneath her began to crumble. Desperation seeped into her veins, amplifying the noise in her mind. Could she bear this fight without losing herself? With every push, every jab of resistance, the echoes of her past roared louder, demanding more from her than she ever anticipated. In that moment, amid the outcry, Emma realized the battle for recognition, justice, and identity was not just hers. It was a fight that would shake the very foundations of everything, past and present. She stood on the precipice of her story, both eager and terrified, knowing the path ahead would be riddled with uncertainty. Would she find the strength to continue, or would the whispers from the past drown her out completely? The town hall was a battleground, and Emma felt every glare like a physical blow. Those who had once smiled at her with the warmth of familiarity now seemed to regard her with skepticism, their eyes narrowing as they scrutinized her intentions. Each moment stretched longer as she faced the crowd. A sea of doubt and resentment surged before her, but she refused to let it drown her. "Emma, you're too young to understand," a voice called from the back, laden with condescension. It was Mrs. Fletcher, a matriarch of sorts, known for her opulent tea parties and disdain for anything that threatened her comfortably constructed world. The words jabbed at Emma, intensifying the knowledge that this was about more than personal desires. It was a confrontation with a history that had engaged her family in a battle long before she was born. Yet here she was, gripping the microphone as if it was her only lifeline. She inhaled deeply, letting the weight of her grandmother's legacy settle into her bones. This was more than just revealing a painful past. It was about reclaiming the quiet strength that had been passed down through generations, strength that had allowed Emma's family to survive when they were dismissed and forgotten.
Every letter speaks of a fight, of resilience against systems that favored the few while silencing the many. Emma started, her voice steadier now. She met the judgmental stares head-on, determination igniting her words. My grandmother didn't back down just because the odds were stacked against her. As her thoughts began to bounce back and forth between the story she had read and the present room of resistant faces, clarity blossomed. She wasn't merely representing her family. She spoke for an entire lineage, a narrative filled with strife and triumph.
The response caught her off guard. Several listeners began shifting in their seats, and for a fleeting second, Emma saw hints of contemplation flicker among the elite. But it wasn't enough. A voice rose again, this time a man with slicked-back hair and well-tailored clothes. "And what do you propose we do, Emma? Ostracize those who have simply embraced their privilege?" His sarcasm cut deeper than any blade, pivoting the spotlight back onto the privileged few who had thrived in this very town. Emma's heart raced. The discomfort coiled in her stomach as she grappled with the question. How could she navigate this delicate space where honesty and ambition were so fiercely contested? Fighting for recognition was one thing, but handling accusations of inciting class warfare was entirely another. "I propose we have conversations," she advocated, discovering her voice in the uncertainty. "About equity and justice, about our past mistakes, and how we can reshape our future together." With each phrase, she recognized the power of her own words, the gravity of her conviction wrapping around her like armor. Yet, as she surveyed the crowd, doubt wove through her conviction like a thread. Would they hear her? Would they consider her truths worthy of dialogue, or would they dismiss her altogether? The tension thickened around her, the air fraught with diverging paths. Either she could accept defeat here, or she could risk everything, her future with Jake, her comfort, her quiet existence, for the chance to ignite a change within. As the seconds passed, Emma felt the indifference of the crowd pressing down heavily. The weight of every unspoken question, every cautious pause, loomed large, challenging her to continue or retreat. Would her revelations mark the beginning of a new era, or were they destined to flicker out like whispers in the wind? With newfound determination, she inhaled, her next words on the verge of breaking forth. But just as she prepared to speak again, the lights flickered ominously overhead, casting shadows that danced along the walls like phantoms. An unexpected twist that threatened to undermine everything lay ahead, and Emma's breath caught, anticipating the turmoil that would inevitably follow. Emma's heart hammered in her chest, the flickering lights heralding more than just a mere electrical malfunction. It was as though the very atmosphere of the town hall, charged with disbelief and resentment, creaked in protest at the idea of change. She forced herself to focus, drawing strength from the weighty glances of a few who began to lean in slightly, carrying with them the potential for transformation, however small. As the light finally steadied, Emma felt a renewed sense of urgency wash over her. The murmurs in the crowd shifted, punctuated by whispers and the rapid pace of her own thoughts. What could she say to make them see her perspective? Could she take this moment of uncertainty and turn it into a springboard for dialogue rather than retreat? A sense of clarity emerged from the chaos. She needed to present her ideas in a way that didn't ignite further walls of resentment. "The conversations won't be easy, I know that," she continued, accentuating each word as if etching them in stone. "They will require us to reflect on our privileges and our responsibilities, not just to ourselves, but to each other. I am not asking for conflict, but for recognition and understanding." But there was still that flicker of doubt lingering beneath her conviction. How could she ensure her passion translated into something tangible? The crowd remained skeptical, and the thread connecting her aspirations to their beliefs seemed wearisome. She had envisioned stepping into this role with boldness, but self-doubt clawed at the edges of her resolve, whispering unsettling questions. "Look around you," Emma gestured toward a family seated in the corner, older yet attentive. "They have spent decades nurturing our community while facing barriers themselves. Their stories deserve our attention as much as those who have flourished in the comfort of privilege." She noticed a glimmer of something in the eyes of the older couple, perhaps recognition or the faintest hint of support. That flicker fed her determination, and she pressed onward, building momentum as she intertwined narratives of endurance into her argument. Fear mingled with her newfound clarity, a reminder of how deeply rooted the barriers in this town were. How many eggshells would she be walking on, and how would she manage to do so without shattering her ambitions? The man who had questioned her earlier still sat, arms crossed, skepticism apparent, but now even he wore a mask of reluctant curiosity. "Words can build bridges," Emma stated resolutely, a rush of adrenaline coursing through her.
But we need effort from everyone, including those who have it all. She could feel people shifting, their intrigue peaking as she spoke. If we commit to listening, we can rebuild this community. Our history isn't just etched in stone. It can be altered, redefined, and made better. It starts with understanding the past. The haunting echo of Mrs. Fletcher's earlier remark lingered in the back of her mind. Too young, too naive. Emma shook her head slightly. It was time to silence those who doubted her, to harness the power of not just her words, but her willingness to brave the consequences of speaking them. Are you ready to have that hard conversation? To learn from each other? Challenge the status quo? She appealed, sincerity bleeding through her words. Each challenge she posed to the crowd became a thread binding her destiny to theirs. Yet, as applause began to ripple through some corners of the audience, the man at the front lifted a brow, determination imprinted on his face. What if the ghosts of our past are too strong?
What if your efforts only lead to more discord? Emma felt the ground shift beneath her. Their engagement offered a portal to a deeper conflict, one she hadn't fully anticipated. The openness of dialogue versus the painful legacy of history swirled around her, a potent dichotomy. She had just caught a glimpse of her own resilience, but was this truly the starting line, or a perilous precipice? The room held a collective breath as Emma prepared to respond, her thoughts racing. This was not just about her own development, it was a litmus test for the entire community. And in that moment, standing before a crowd that could either uplift or undo her, the stakes skyrocketed beyond personal ambition. She would have to fight with everything she had to prevent the past from controlling their future. What awaited her in the tension of those words? Emma inhaled slowly, the weight of the man's challenge pressing against her chest. For a fleeting moment, doubt threatened to creep back in, but she pushed it away, drawing on the conviction that had sparked her initial call to action. The air thickened with anticipation, a palpable tension, electric like the flickering lights that had momentarily dimmed her resolve. "You're right," she acknowledged, capturing the crowd's attention with sincerity. "The ghosts of our past are real, and they've shaped who we are today. Ignoring them is not the solution. But what if we shine a light on those shadows instead, and use that understanding to move forward?" Her voice resonated through the hall again, her pulse quickening as she began to weave a narrative bigger than herself. She envisioned the conversations that had turned into silence, the stories silenced by pain that needed to be voiced. To her surprise, the resonance in her words began piecing together fragments of hope in the atmosphere. "I stand here at this moment, not just to speak, but to listen, precisely because I believe change requires us to confront our history. We have an opportunity, right now, to challenge the notion that the past is an unchangeable burden." She paused, searching the faces of her audience for signs of engagement, her pulse echoing in her ears. The man, still fixed in his seats, displayed subtle movements, a furrowed brow, a slight loosening of crossed arms. Emma felt a surge of resolve. If she could prompt even a single inch of movement, she would break through the barricade of skepticism. We cannot revise history, but we can learn from it. We can take bold steps toward accountability and break down the division that stems from ignorance. Each of you has a role to play, whether by listening, by reflecting, or by engaging in the necessary tough discussions. The echo of her words lingered, and she sensed a stirring in the crowd, a shift from tight skepticism to tentative openness. Yet the man remained cautious, his skepticism still imprinted in his features. "But what if all you're doing is opening old wounds?"
He pressed, his voice measured as if still on guard. A challenge. She needed to take a decisive step to channel this dynamic, this shift from resistance to consideration. Every wound heals at different rates, but healing begins with acknowledgement. We cannot move past pain until we recognize it. If we allow our fears to dictate our path forward, we will suffocate in our own darkness. Emma could feel the swell of energy among those listening, a wave urging them to lean in further, to think deeper. Each heartbeat pulsed with urgency. She needed to dig deeper than just words to forge a path toward change. There was no blueprint for this journey, but it required authentic vulnerability, a raw confrontation of fears that mirrored her own. The thought crackled in her mind. What personal sacrifices could she make to empower them all? How many of us have shied away from hard conversations in our own lives? She continued, her demeanor shifting from lecturer to partner in dialogue. Every person encounters friction. It's part of existence. If we can address that friction together, we can come out transformed rather than divided. As Emma finished, she surveyed the crowd. She saw glimmers of curiosity and apprehension battling for dominance across their faces. This was not merely a public confrontation. It was a dialogue of admission, a confirmation of deeper human experiences.
The past no longer towered as a monolithic ghost. It presented itself instead as a series of interconnected narratives waiting to be discovered. Just as she felt she could reach a pivotal breakthrough, the lights flickered again, a jarring sensation in the air. She steeled herself, unconsciously gripping the podium for support. "Will you join me in redefining our story?" Emma whispered, her plea echoing above the rumble of uncertainty. But unpredictably, a voice broke through from the back, sharpening the edge of her resolve. "And what if we find that we don't want to rewrite our story?" The room pulsated with tension, an electric challenge hanging in the air. Emma understood intuitively that her next response could change everything. This was not just the community's reckoning, it was also her own journey, her own metamorphosis. What if the answer to that question wasn't just about history, but the very fabric of her future? Emma sensed the heat of the challenge wrap around her like a thick fog. The man's question tore through the air, echoing in her mind. It hung there, impossible to dismiss. What did a story mean without the people willing to speak it? Was she about to plunge into a conflict that didn't even have a resolution in sight? Her initial rush toward activism carried more weight when she faced the withdrawal of engagement. What if her vision of rewriting their narrative clashed violently with their reality? How could she possibly influence a group who may still feel more allegiance to their past than an uncertain future?
With her heart racing, Emma scanned the crowd for familiar faces. For a fleeting second, she found solace in the presence of those who supported her from the beginning. Yet the raw challenge zapped her resolve. What they needed was a willingness to pierce through this stagnation. Deep down, she also needed to confront her fear, the risk of being labeled a failed leader. "Then let us explore that," Emma proposed, slight tremors coursing through her voice. She realized that navigating a collective narrative meant also publicly sitting with their resistance. What happens to those who refuse to acknowledge their own histories? Does it mean we are destined to repeat them? Or does it mean we forever remain shackled by memories that no longer serve us? Her words resonated like a stone ricocheting across water, intersecting connections and rippling possibilities. For every eyebrow raised, she saw a flicker of thought. A gradual loosening of tension began to liberate the air. With that tension came the potential for transformation. The man shifted in his seat. Perhaps he was reconsidering, but he was still firmly entrenched in his skepticism. "It's easier to cling to the past," he challenged, his voice deep and seasoned. "You risk blurring the lines between acknowledgement and resentment." A familiar chill washed over Emma. Was this about her, or the doubts fueling her conviction? While she appreciated the debate, she also sensed this was a defining moment. This was the confrontation she yearned for, a moment to articulate the evolution from acceptance to action. "Maybe we need to redefine what we believe resentment means," she shot back, her confidence surging from the core of her convictions. "Maybe it's not the acknowledgement of pain that paralyzes us, but the unwillingness to change what stems from it. By clinging to old burdens, aren't we giving them control over our lives?" Her pulse raced as she felt the room shift. Faces turned more introspective rather than defensive. Hope mingled with hesitation. The tension felt heavier yet more meaningful. We can craft a narrative that articulates our trauma and highlights our victories. We have the power to choose how we emerge from darkness. What do you stand to gain? For a moment, the man was silent, caught in the swell of contemplation and perhaps regret over his earlier retort. Emma's voice softened, laden with underlying empathy. "Even if it means shedding old identities, what are we really afraid of losing?" She continued weaving her tapestry of ideas, her insecurities ebbing. With each challenge met with clarity, she unraveled subtle threads of connection. Perhaps this was about resilience, a communion with shared vulnerabilities. The flickering lights no longer distracted her. They were companions illuminating the path forward. As she spoke, a subtle change began to manifest. She had facilitated the dialogue she craved, not just for others, but for herself.
The self-doubt slowly morphed into a tether, an invisible bond threading through their narratives while transforming her purpose into action. But as she looked into the man's eyes, she felt the weight of an enigmatic truth. He hadn't just posed a question, he carried a lifetime of stories that would demand exploration. With a heart half buoyed by triumph and half shrouded in uncertainty, she sensed the pull toward a deeper conflict. Just as she concluded her thoughts, his resistance directly pierced her optimism. And what if the stories buried within bring nothing but painful truths we cannot face? The air hung thick with weighty possibilities. Emma realized the audience wasn't merely watching. They were choosing whether to step into the fray or retreat. What if her next move could strike a transformative chord? Or would it risk a desperate plunge into the abyss of their history? With her legs trembling, she prepared to navigate the very questions she sought to avoid. Emma steadied herself, The intensity of the man's gaze pinned her like an insect under glass. The question loomed in the air, its haunting undercurrent tapping into an unsettling well of fear. The thought of unearthing painful histories that could fracture alliances unsettled her stomach. But she knew complacency would serve only to deepen their collective trauma. Painful truths can also be catalysts for healing, she insisted, her mind racing to find the right words. What if we were brave enough to face them together? Isn't that the cornerstone of resilience? Each syllable came with a weight she hadn't anticipated. Even as she spoke, she grappled with a sense of vulnerability tinged with anticipation. The room shifted again. Energy swirled as faces considered her plea. Emma's voice had become a bridge spanning the distance between their past and a potential future. Yet doubts still lingered like shadows. The harsh reality was that she had no experience guiding others through such treacherous waters. Could someone inexperienced in the depths of pain claim to be their captain? Facing the past means we might have to confront some demons, she continued, her voice firm despite the tremor of her insides. What if that confrontation gives us control rather than the feeling of being haunted? The man shifted again, tension easing his features momentarily. Was that hope flickering amidst disdain? This reconfiguration motivated her to strip the layers further, probing the vulnerabilities that tethered them to despair. Consider what you've endured, she pressed on. The memories can imprison or empower you. By dragging your anchor through turmoil, you can decide. Do you float or sink? She paused, watching the vulnerability reflect off those in the audience. In that moment, she realized her own anchors were lifting, revealing insight beneath her uncertainty. A woman in the audience leaned forward, her brow furrowed.
What if we've become so accustomed to our pain that letting go feels like losing ourselves? The question struck Emma like an electric current. This was the emotional crux. She had walked this tightrope before. What if reclaiming our voice means realizing we can reshape our identities? She countered, urging the crowd to consider transformation over stagnation. It raised questions not merely pertaining to the individuals present, but to herself. Who had she become in this pursuit? Fueled by a determination that burned brighter than before, Emma recognized that her own story intertwined with theirs. She wasn't just a leader, she was one of them, a bearer of scars too. If we shed old identities, we leave room for new ones to emerge. Suddenly, she felt the tide of conversation beginning to shift. The man, once a figure of skepticism, now tempered his frown. But changing our stories isn't easy. Some truths are so deeply buried that airing them might unleash chaos. Echoes of fear swept through her thoughts, resonating with the very tensions that clung to her own past. Yet she pressed forward. Chaos is often a precursor to growth. What is life without challenge? Look to nature. A seed must crack open to sprout. Wouldn't it be worth the struggle to see what might bloom? As the audience engaged more, Emma felt the pressure against her chest ease. Clarity expanded within her. Their narratives began to feel like shared burdens waiting to be lifted. She caught snippets of whispers. Could this really be the beginning of something transformative? Yet doubt nagged at her. Was she fostering an illusory hope that she might not be equipped to support? As she sensed the conversation becoming richer, a fear clawed at her that perhaps she would ultimately falter in leading them through the revelations that lay ahead. I wonder, she muttered aloud, casting her gaze to the floor, what will happen when the buried stories surface? Will we overstep the boundaries we fear? The hesitation in her own voice felt contagious, a chill shifting through the crowd. Emma's vulnerability exposed something deeper. Each face reflected uncertainty, echoing her own fears of inadequacy. Finding her voice again, she swallowed hard, grasping for the conviction that had ignited her spirit moments ago. The time has come to ask ourselves, what do we truly gain from our silence? As she looked across the crowd, her heart pounded in sync with their collective breaths. The next steps hung in fragile anticipation, intertwining her fate with theirs. What would she discover about herself and them as they plunged into this uncertain unearthing of truths? Emma prepared herself for what awaited. This was only the beginning. The moment hung in the air like a fragile thread, each participant deep in their thoughts, weaving together past hurts and hopeful futures. Emma's heart raced as she sensed the collective weight of their anxieties, yet a flicker of resolve ignited within her.
She was in uncharted territory, yet it was here, in the midst of vulnerability, that she understood the true essence of leadership. It was not about having all the answers, but creating an environment where questions could be voiced. Let's begin with one story, she suggested, her voice steadying. Each word served as an invitation, fragile but unyielding. One story that can unravel our silence and spark conversation.
A man in the back raised his hand hesitantly, and she nodded, acknowledging his courage amidst the ambivalence. I lost my sister last year, he stammered. I thought keeping things quiet would protect my family, but it only isolated us. We pretend like everything is fine. A hush fell across the crowd as his admission rippled through them, breaking the tension. Emma felt a shift, a small crack in the wall of silence that had shielded them. Yet within her, more questions bubbled to the surface. What had kept her quiet in her own life? The fear of rejection, of opening old wounds? Each whisper from the audience confirmed that silence was both a burden and a protective veil. The fear of losing one's identity through the act of sharing was almost palpable. Thank you for sharing that, Emma responded, her voice reflecting empathy. And you're right, silence often feels like a safe harbor. But consider how lonely it becomes. What if sharing your truth could bring connection instead? She glanced around the room, catching their eyes. One by one, seemingly stitched from the same fabric of pain, they began to exhale their apprehensions. Stories arose like threadbare curtains, trembling, yet revealing glimpses of their lived experiences. A woman spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. I always assumed being strong meant bearing the weight alone, but I don't want to just survive, I want to thrive. Emma's heart surged with determination. This was the essence of their gathering. Each voice was a brick, rebuilding their foundational belief in unity. Yet she recognized the paradox. While they sought connection, the fear of burdening one another loomed heavy. Somewhere in her contemplation, Emma discovered a wellspring of clarity. She reminded herself that her growth was tied not just to spoken words, but to shared experiences. Think about the weight we carry. What if the act of sharing another story lightens our own, she mused, the idea crystallizing like ice under the sun. A ripple of nods moved through the audience, tentative but hopeful. She was beginning to see them for who they could be, resilient, courageous individuals unearthing the foundations of their strength. Yet her thoughts persisted. How could she harness this momentum without losing herself in the process? The room buzzed with conversation, a symphony of overlapping stories forming an intricate tapestry of vulnerability. It was exhilarating, but also terrifying. Could she navigate the waters of deep emotional turmoil without drowning in her uncertainty?
Amidst newfound camaraderie, she felt the heat of doubt flickering at her edges. Could she maintain her grounding as she bore witness to their unfolding? What did her role as a leader consist of now that wounds were exposed? Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the murmur. What if we uncover secrets that we're not ready to handle? It was the man again, the skeptic who had once haunted her thoughts. What happens when we reveal what isn't meant to be shared? Emma inhaled sharply, the challenge resonating like a tolling bell. Could she confront her own fears along with theirs? The truth is, she responded, emboldened, we might not be ready for everything, but together, I believe we can brace for anything, one step at a time. As she spoke, a realization dawned. Her journey mirrored theirs, each of them wading through uncertainty, grappling with what it meant to embrace their stories, a journey that demanded vulnerability but promised growth. The crowd quieted again, faces drawn with contemplation, yet Emma acknowledged a profound shift in energy. They were becoming a collective, no longer merely individuals. Their intertwined paths were beginning to weave a narrative of resilience and rebirth. But as they lingered in this newfound solidarity, the overarching fear loomed larger than before. What truths lurked beneath the surface, ready to erupt? Emma knew they were on the precipice of transformation. However, the reality of confronting deeply buried pain loomed. As they embarked further into territory untraveled, her resolve twisted into a question. Was she prepared to unveil the very threads of her own story that had been tucked away for so long? With each heartbeat echoing in the room, she understood they were not just seeking healing. They were wrestling with the prospect of a new identity. The air thickened with anticipation, setting the stage for a revelation that could either bind them or fracture their nascent community. And as Emma contemplated the unfolding potential, she felt their stories tugging at the very fabric of her own. Was she ready to step fully into vulnerability herself? The implicit challenge loomed, unsettling yet compelling, urging her toward a confrontation that might transform everything. Emma stood before the swirling sea of stories, the gravity of their shared experiences enveloping her like a thick fog. With each revelation, she felt a disquieting truth unfurl within her. It was one thing to guide others toward their truths, but it was another entirely to confront her own. A specter of doubt clawed at her resolve. Who was she to lead when her own narrative remained cloaked in shadows? The room shifted. She could sense the anticipatory quiet crackling through the air, and it filled her with recognition of her own leadership challenge.
While she had initially viewed herself as a beacon for the group, now she questioned whether she was merely a bedfellow of their uncertainties, grappling with the unseen wounds she kept so carefully hidden. As the discussions blossomed, she noted a woman's honesty about an abusive past, a man's apology to his estranged son,
and others voicing their long-held regrets. Each story resonated within the walls of her mind, echoing her own fears. The illuminated faces around her reminded her of her responsibility, but suddenly, all that responsibility hung on a knife's edge. Could her honesty add to their burdens? In that moment, her inner turmoil transformed into clarity. The realization struck like lightning. Her strength lay not in shrouding her fears, but in showing the courage to confront them. This was her growth. Instead of holding herself apart from them as a leader, she could weave herself into this tapestry of vulnerability. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer to the circle of stories, letting their strength seep into her bones. "I want to share something of my own," she began, her voice firm yet gentle. An earthquake of emotions ricocheted through her, and she felt the earth shift beneath her. But she pressed on, emboldened by the warmth of those she now considered allies. "There was a time when I felt utterly unworthy of speaking up. I carried guilt over past decisions, over dreams expected versus dreams lived." The words felt heavy yet liberating. She caught a few startled expressions as her authenticity rippled through the crowd. She braved a glance at the man who had questioned the safety of truth. His face softened, a tangible curiosity dawning where skepticism used to simmer. "Emma," a voice broke through, a friend who had often rallied around her for support. "You've always been strong, but admitting vulnerability, that's strength too." The words resonated deeply, knitting themselves into her conviction. Tears stung her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. This was not a moment for regret. It was an opportunity for communion in the rawness of their experiences. Each emotional thread they exchanged had the potential to create something remarkable, a bridge to walk into empowerment, of rebuilding lives beyond the pain. As shared stories continued to flow, Emma felt the memories of her past begin to reorganize in her mind. A flicker of recognition settled in. "What if validating the darkness empowers us to journey through it together?" She ventured into the bubbling conversation. That caught the group off guard. The hesitation wavered, their heads tilted in unison. "Yes," a voice called out from the back. "What if disappearing into our stories frees us, rather than locking us in?" An unexpected surge of courage rippled through the crowd. They were realizing that their stories, collectively woven, could be the very catalyst for transformation. They hadn't just offered bits of their lives. They designed a path to reconciliation with the past. But as Emma spoke about the narratives of healing they were creating, a nagging thought dogged her. Was this journey not as much about them as it was about her unearthing the deepest truths of her own life? Each shared narrative presented a mirror, not one that she could easily turn away from. In her rush of adrenaline and shared vulnerability, Emma realized that she dared to bear witness to her own truth. The tension of unspoken fears lingered like a shadow over the group, ready to manifest. As the discussions amplified around her, a moment of silence enveloped them like a shroud. Each face reflected an uncharted path. They all understood full well the peril of diving into the unknown. Emma locked eyes with the man from earlier, sensing the challenge he posed lingering still. A tremor of dread raced up her spine. Was there something within herself that she still had yet to confront? The warmth of burgeoning solidarity, although compelling, did nothing to quell her fear. Yet fear, she understood now, was just a part of the process, a prelude to empowerment, to growth. Was she prepared to confront the roots of her self-doubt? The question echoed loudly in her thoughts, reverberating through the visceral bonds they had all begun to form. And with that thought, a flicker of motivation ignited within her. Perhaps the greatest leap of faith awaited her at the edge of her own truth. Here they were, on the cusp of something great, yet it also lay within her to determine how deeply willing she was to venture. As the conversation shifted, a familiar voice emerged with renewed defiance. But what happens if embracing these narratives, if facing our truths, unleashes heart we cannot control? The skepticism was back, more pronounced now. Challenge accepted, Emma thought, pulse racing at this unveiled invitation to explore both trauma and triumph. What barriers would she have to surmount in stepping into that light? And more importantly, could vulnerability truly guide them all toward a newfound identity? The answers were hidden somewhere within, just waiting to be discovered. The air hummed with an electric mix of curiosity and trepidation, each participant wrestling with the weight of their own histories. Emma felt the tension coalesce into a single powerful force. This was more than a gathering. It was a crucible for transformation. She was no longer merely an observer, but an active participant in the pulsating current of shared narratives.
She felt the fight within herself shift, the impulse to retreat clashing with the instinct to forge ahead. "Look," she began, a sense of urgency propelling her words. "I understand the fear of what might come from this. We've all built walls to protect ourselves." The room remained quiet, the faces reflecting a mix of apprehension and hope. "But if we don't challenge our fears, we risk remaining trapped in the shadows."
She paused, gauging the energy in the room. It felt almost tangible, a web connecting them all. Could vulnerability be the key they had overlooked? Yes, the man who had challenged her before spoke up. But fear can consume us, Emma. We can open old wounds without knowing how to heal them. His tone was cautious, and Emma recognized the validity of his concern, but the moment felt ripe for growth. What if releasing those fears is part of healing? What if each story we share has the power to change us, to free us? A ripple of disbelief passed through the group, yet their eyes reflected a longing for something more, a hope for liberation rather than entrapment. "Think about it," she pressed on, her resolve swelling within. "Every truth we unearth is another layer stripped away. What we hide holds power over us. Facing it takes that power back." An elder in the group leaned forward, eyes bright with recollection. "You're speaking from experience," he observed, a gentle challenge in his voice. "What shadows do you carry, Emma?" In that moment, her heart raced. It was time to confront the roots of her own self-doubt. She could either cloak herself in hesitation or embrace this moment for what it was, an opportunity for profound honesty. "All right," she responded, finding the wind beneath her wings. "Here it is. I'm afraid of failing you all. I've shied away from moments that tested my resolve. I've hidden behind the title of a guide instead of stepping into the light of who I am." The revelation hung in the air, heavy yet liberating. Emma's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed forward. "I've walked through life holding on to fears of being unworthy and unqualified, afraid to see the real impact of my past choices on my present." Silence reverberated through the room. She felt energy shift, the collective weight of shared vulnerability knitting them closer. The skepticism began to fade, replaced by a weighty recognition of their interconnectedness. "What brought you to that place of unworthiness?" A woman's voice rose softly from the group. There was a collective tilt of attention as all awaited Emma's response. The group wanted to understand their leader's shadows, to see if her experiences mirrored their own. "An overwhelming sense of obligation," she admitted. "I've always been driven to meet others' expectations, to help and support from the sidelines rather than embracing my own potential." The weight of her confession settled heavily around them, the shared recognition of internal conflicts visibly playing across their faces. Bonds were forming, not solely from the words, but from the understanding that each person struggled with some form of self-imposed limitation. A hand rose hesitantly in the back, a voice quivering. "Have you ever thought of what could happen if you took that leap of faith? What if we fell together?" Emma's pulse quickened, her mind raced with the possibilities. The unknown loomed, beautiful yet terrifying. What if sharing her most hidden insecurities transformed them all? Could this be the beginning of a collective journey toward empowerment? "Together?" Emma echoed, the word igniting a hopeful spark in her heart. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's not about being a solitary guide, but weaving ourselves into this tapestry of shared healing. But just as the sense of camaraderie blossomed, she felt a deep stir of anxiety bubble within. What would it look like to truly leap into that unknown space together? The complexity of peeling away their vulnerabilities threatened to erupt into chaos. Yet there was no turning back. Emma locked eyes with the skeptic. Are we prepared to risk that leap, to confront our fears and embrace the possibility of freedom? The air crackled again with fracturing uncertainty. Every participant bore the urgency of the decision. Each faced own fears, fear of openness, fear of failure, fear of pain. It became clear that in raising these questions, she had not only put her own vulnerabilities on display, but the group's as well. Anna, the woman with whom she had bonded earlier, nodded slowly in resignation. It could hurt, but what if it also leads us to something remarkable? Emma held her breath, poised on the edge of transformation, aware that a precipice now loomed before them. What deeper struggles still resided beneath the surface, waiting for courage to unearth them? They stood at the bottom of a steep cliff, teetering yet teeming with potential. How far would they all be willing to go to discover the truth buried within? As a collective silence fell, a similar thought echoed through each of their minds. What awaited them on the other side of this journey? The only way forward was through a labyrinth of their own courage. Emma took a step toward the unknown, her heart full of resolve. With a steadying breath, she met their gazes. Then let's leap together. And just as she stepped toward the unknown, a different question emerged.
Were the scars they bore truly the marks of pain, or could they be transformed into a map guiding them toward purpose and growth? As the meeting unfolded, Emma stood tall amid the uncertainty that swirled around them. Her heart drummed in rhythm with the potent electricity of shared vulnerability. She felt an unmistakable shift. The fears once shackled in the shadows were now ready to emerge into the light. This was no mere assembly. It was the crucible of courageous transformation, where healing would ripple through the fabric of their lives. "Together we are powerful," she declared, firmly planting herself at the focal point of the congregation. "When we embrace our stories, we fuel change, not just for ourselves, but for our community." The crowd seemed to swell with anticipation, forming a woven tapestry of desires and fears. She began to guide their discussion toward the common threads linking their experiences.
What truths have we kept buried, and how do those truths shape our actions today? Each word carved a new path, leading their collective journey into uncharted territory. One man near the front, his voice gravelly with emotion, stood up. "My parents never spoke of their struggles, but I know they sacrificed everything for us. I want to honor that, but I fear their pain is buried too deep." His honesty ignited nods of agreement from others. Emma didn't hesitate. "Your willingness to honor their legacy is your strength." As she said this, she felt something profound shift within her as well. Every shared truth deepened her understanding of their struggles, reflected her own. "Can we all embrace the hard truth that silence perpetuates trauma?" Emma continued, feeling the energy in the room humming with recognition. "By sharing our burdens, we begin to liberate ourselves." As the dialogue blossomed, others began to voice their connections too. A woman from the back spoke up, her voice steady. "I've experienced loss, yet I tried to shield myself from the pain instead of confronting it. My family's silence holds me hostage." Each expression, each story danced through the room, intertwined by the collective desire for freedom. Emma's heart brimmed with pride as she observed the tide turning. Their fears began to coalesce into a shared dream of resilience. In those moments, she realized her journey mirrored theirs. This fight was not solely about reclaiming her lineage, but about establishing her identity as a force for change. The more they exposed their vulnerabilities, the more palpable the sense of liberation became. The skeptic from the beginning, still steeped in his doubts, raised his hand once more. But what if those buried truths create splits? What if not everyone is ready to confront their pasts? Emma inhaled deeply. That is the essence of growth. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, but it's crucial. What matters most is our willingness to take that first step together. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and gazes locked with hers as they framed the contours of possibility. She felt herself transformed by this exchange, her resolve unwavering. "Here's what I propose," she announced, her spirit buoyed by the momentum. "Let's create a safe space for our truths, a shared forum where we can support one another, where every painful story becomes another thread in our community's tapestry." The energy in the room surged as heads nodded fervently. She discerned the shift from doubt to trust. This was not just Emma's journey anymore. It had morphed into something grander, something forged in unity. They were no longer victims of their experiences. They were architects of their shared destiny. This very moment broadened her understanding of true leadership. No longer was she merely a guide, but she became an equal participant in this transformational journey that extended beyond her identity. As the crowd erupted in applause and agreement, a rush of exhilaration coursed through Emma's veins. She had achieved what felt impossible just moments ago. Her fear transformed into strength, her hesitation into leadership. She stood proud, fueled by the undeniable truth that their collective history could ignite something profound. "I will shoulder this journey with you," she vowed, the conviction in her voice ringing clear. "We will honor our past while crafting a future together, one step at a time." And in that moment, she felt tethered to a legacy that nourished her spirit. Emma was no longer just the caretaker of her family's history, but an architect of a collaborative future, formed from understanding and kindness. The meeting concluded, but the atmosphere lingered with unyielding energy, and she felt fulfilled by its collective essence. They were ready to leap into the unknown, forging ahead with certainty, despite the obstacles yet ahead. With renewed courage, Emma stepped out into the summer breeze, her heart unshackled from fears and doubts. Their journey was only beginning, yet she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had not only reclaimed her voice, but had amplified the voices of others as they moved toward genuine collective empowerment. She realized she had transcended the timid girl once defined by inheritance. Instead, she had become a woman of purpose, a beacon of light guiding herself and those around her toward a future rich with the promise of change.
Together, she breathed under her breath, feeling a weight lifted. We will redefine our stories. As the town bore witness to this new narrative unfolding, it was clear that transformation was not merely possible, it was inevitable. Now, take the leap towards transformation in your own life. You need to subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss inspiring emotional stories that will change your perspective on life. Leave a like now to empower our message and feed the algorithm that helps others find this journey. Comment below your reactions and theories about this incredible conclusion. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who deserve to witness the power of personal growth. Together, let's unveil the stories that matter.